Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. How lovely to see you all here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the National Cycle Network. And not only do we have lots of Sustrans supporters and other people in the room, we also have 200 people joining us online this evening. A warm welcome to you all for this event. Many of you, I know, have given money, time, advocacy, local community to support the National Cycle Network and to bring it to where it is today. So let's start off with a huge thank you for being here to celebrate your efforts in making the National Cycle Network what it is today. We're not expecting, if I have to do now the fire drill stuff, we're not expecting a fire drill. There's a fire exit just over there though, so that's where you would go if there's any sort of fire alarm. Enjoy this evening. Our first speaker is our current CEO, Xavier Brice. So I would welcome Xavier to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Di, and thank you and welcome everyone. But I'd like to give a special welcome to John, so John Grimshaw, who is there. So I think John is Sustrans' founder, an engineer, and a continued force of nature who, at the age of 80, is still builder of paths for people and a director of Greenways and Cycleroutes, I think, still. And John was actually the first person I sought out after getting this job as CEO of Sustrans Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust almost 10 years ago. And it's great to be here at the same event with him in 2025 as we evolve Sustrans into Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust. I will say a bit more on that later because we're here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the National Cycle Network. Now, I joined Sustrans 10 years ago, as mentioned, but I first came across Sustrans almost 25 years ago. So back in 2002, I was planning a cycle ride, actually a tandem trip, from Padstow to Taunton with my girlfriend, who then is now my wife. And in order to do that, I had to send away for a book, which seems rather quaint today, doesn't it? You don't go online. I sent away for a book to Sustrans for the National Cycle Network book. I'd never heard of Sustrans. So I got this book, planned out our trip, and we had a wonderful, wonderful trip along that. So much so that when I got back, I set up a direct debit to Sustrans as a certain page in the book told me to do, basically. So, but what struck me then was not only how pleasant the experience was and how amazing it was, but also the way that the NCN was clearly a product of civil society in the largest sense. And what I mean by that was, yes, there's a charity, but it's also individuals giving their time and money. It's private companies, it's government, local and national, and it's a myriad of different funders who made the NCN happen. And of course, it was £42 million from the Millennium Fund that really got it going 30 years ago, and it's great to have people from National Lottery or Community Lottery Fund here today. But behind that all was the energy of John Grimshaw, his vision, and somebody was talking to me about John's vision earlier out there, and also his co-founders, colleagues, and critically volunteers who transformed this country's ability to walk, wheel and cycle. But not only in that sort of practical sense of providing paths for people, but also showing what was possible, showing that a more sustainable future, a better future, was real, could be here today and could be tangible. And going back to why I'm at Sustrans, that's what attracted me, the fact that Sustrans makes change happen on the ground, working with people. And it's really hard, but really rewarding. And here we are, 30 years on, celebrating the achievement of all those people across all those years, many of whom are in the room today. So we stand on the shoulders of giants. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. And that rich mix of people and organisations that make this all possible continue to support the National Cycle Network. So it's great to have so many supporters, volunteers, partners, colleagues and funders here, whether online or in the room with us today, as we celebrate the past and look forward to the future. So a huge thank you. And finally, before I hand over to John, I've got a short video on the NCN, so a chance for a tech failure. But if it doesn't fail, we will get a short video talking about what the NCN, the National Cycle Network, is doing today. So here we go.
So once I started cycling, I found my muscles were getting stronger and the pain disappeared.
We discovered like the National Cycle Network. Suddenly there's so many more places to explore.
It was important for me to create this walking group for black women because I didn't see any people of colour or black people out walking in certain places where I used to walk.
Once I discovered accessible cycling, I realised how much fun it was. It's really lovely being with a group of people when you're cycling.
150 men have joined us so far. A lot of the men that do join us come for their mental health, and we'll talk about it.
You know, without these paths, it'd be difficult to do these walks.
People of different races, religion, they all come together and cycle. To see so many people benefit from the group is fantastic.
It's almost like the National Cycle Network is like a friend in that it's saying, you know, here, come explore in a comforting and safe way.
Seeing the friendships is forming is just fantastic and makes me feel so proud.
If you've just got just that little thought that it might be worth trying, try it.
Cool. So a clap for the NCM, and I'll now hand over to John. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Xavier. Right, welcome, and nice to see some, well, lots of familiar faces, really. People who've been forced to dig awful holes and heave rocks around. Are we ready to go? On right. Not yet. Here we are. This is the River Ouse Bridge at Selby, and this is where Sustrans itself as an organisation started. I'm very quickly going to give you a brief review of how the small campaign group in Bristol started all this. That was Cyclebag 1977. Do we have any original members here? Look at this. Wow, half the audience. Oh, thank you. And of course, to build stuff, we had to have a trading company. So we had a trading company, which Chris over there set up for us. And then later on in 1984, that transformed into Sustrans. And at the end, I'll just touch on the hundreds of partners who made this possible and a little bit of the work we're doing in Greenways now. So this all started in 1977. Those of you who know this thing, this car just in the bottom is on the A4 past the cathedral. And at that time, the main road from London to Fishguard went straight past the cathedral. Some of you will remember it. And this was our first rally in 1977. Of course, it didn't do anything good at all, so we took over public spaces. We'd probably all be in prison nowadays. But this was Castle Green. The hotel at the back complained, and so the council planted trees there to prevent that happening again. And we got fed up with all that, so we went off and built our own route between Bristol and Bath. And Avon at the time gave us the route for £1 from Bitton to Bath, 8 kilometres. And we didn't really know much about how to build routes, so we just got a lot of lorries dumping stone and rolled it in. We used forced labour right from the beginning, of course. And we did a few sophisticated things like concreting a bridge at Salford. So if any of you are at Salford, that's the first bridge that was ever built by all of us. And it was hugely popular that first autumn, because we started in July and finished in September, 5 miles with volunteers in 3 months. And it was just a limestone dust path, but it was very, very popular. And we then went on into Bristol, and we were very lucky because the government's various schemes for the unemployed, youth employment and so on were coming in. You can tell who they are. They're these ones here. And they built all the way into Bristol in teams. I'm not pointing this at the right place, sorry. It's not moving on. I'll move on this one. It's not moving on that one either. We're stuck.
Should work now.
Right. And gradually we transformed this. This is my favourite picture of the path because the editor of the Evening Post completely opposed this project on the grounds that this particular path, just here, was his favourite part of the disused railway. And when I met him, when we had opened it, walking his dog the first week afterwards, he was very sheepish. So we then said, right, well, this is obviously a good idea. Let's build paths wherever we can. Every town in the West Country needs a route like this, so we tackled Swindon and Cheltenham. And a very early one we did was Ashton to Pill. And if you've ever, well, I'm sure some of you cycle down that, but this corner here is a very favourite of mine because we cut the rock face back just with mattocks. And this was built with yachts, so they were all 16-year-olds. And the main problem we had was a tramp in the woods who was bigger than them and would throw them off the dumper and twice drove the dumper into the river. Oh dear, so I'm going too fast now. So this was the opening day. We had lots and lots of openings. George Platt's on the left here. He was the guy who invented Cycle Bag, which stands for Channel Your Calf and Leg Energy into the Bristol Action Group. Alex Moulton's on the right, who was our patron at the time. And one very important consequence of this was the Secretary of State for Transport asked us to look at all the disused railways in England and Wales, and it was published by HS2 in 1982. And because we knew this was just a paper exercise to get us off his back, because we've been writing letters, we wrote 33 annexes, one for each project, and they covered the whole country, and they formed the basis for the next 10 years of work. And one of these was the Plym Valley up to Dartmoor. This is John Kelly, who was our supervisor, and he had a team of unemployed people who were tackling, you know, really quite big projects. They were having to put the new coping stones on top of Ham Green Viaduct there. If you're a railway fan, you can see the Brunel's Piers just beyond. And this is now the southern end, of course, of the route from Ilfracombe to Plymouth. And this is the team. And it was really quite challenging work. They were working at quite great heights. We didn't have any site facilities. I remember the public health office from Plymouth came out and said, where are your site facilities? And I just pointed to the river. Couldn't do that these days. And then the next breakthrough really was with the British Waterways at the time. And the clerk of Bathampton Parish Council took me out here and said, look, nobody can walk along the canal in the wintertime, Bathampton to Bath. Please do something about it. So we put a team together, and this team worked for nearly 6 years. Different people in the team worked for 6 years to finish the path all the way from Bath to Devizes. And this is where we first realised that really pedestrians were a very, very important player on the scheme. It was pedestrians and cyclists, if you follow me. So by 1984, we had, this was still before Sustrans, we'd got quite a lot of projects going around the country. And then the Countryside Commission in Leeds rang me up and said, look, John, would you buy the railway from York to Selby? And we hadn't bought anything up to now, we just leased things and so on. And so I said yes, and that afternoon agreed to buy it from the railways for £1. And we never paid more than £1 if we could help it. And the deal was that there were lots of liabilities which were minus £1 million, and there were lots of assets which were always plus £1 million, so you ended up with £1. Anyway, the railways, of course, nicked the rails, because this was the main line, the Flying Scotsman line from London to Edinburgh, which was being diverted because of the coalfield. But they left us the ballast, and we sold the ballast to build the York bypass, and that gave us enough money to build the whole of the path. And again, we used a manpower services team. This was run by the Diocesan Regional Welfare Group, I think. And in all, we had 900 people working for us, all of whom were employed by these different groups. And this really gave us a huge flying start around the country. This was the first time we'd seriously thought about horses. And it was one of the first times we started thinking about sculpture. This cyclist is actually fishing the Flying Scotsman out of the river, but it's twiddled around the fishing rod there. And so in quite short order, we took over a whole string of railways because there was a person in British Rail who really didn't want to see these old railways lost. So he kept ringing me up and said, would I take this one? And it would be £1. And would I take this one? And it would be £1, and so on and so forth. And so it went on like that. And then the biggest and the longest was the Consett and Sunderland path, where there were 3 councils all fighting with each other. None of them could agree. And we came to the conclusion that cross-border paths were really good because nobody else could agree. And our best paths always went through the corner of Ford and survey maps because nobody could get them together either. Anyway, at Consett to Sunderland, we had a really nice relationship with the Arts Council, who started working on sculpture with us. These transformers, one a coal worker and one a steel worker, were at the boundary between Stanley and Consett. This stainless steel theodolite and level have become the sort of symbol of Consett and the steelworks. And then Andy Goldsworthy did this big Lambton worm, which some of you may have seen. And curiously, he'd never been to this area, and when he'd just done this little drawing in the mud, so to speak, he went to the local pub, and it was called the Lambton Worm, which was very nice, I thought. And then our biggest challenge was the Liverpool Loop Line, and because it was almost entirely through urban areas, quite tough urban areas as well. And we built that over 3 years. And I've highlighted the little green area, which I'll just blow up, just to show the sort of teams of groups that you have to put together to build these projects. Community Task Force, DFE, and then all the boroughs had to be involved, and British Rail and so on. And so you were relying entirely on the goodwill of a lot of people to get these things through. And that's what the Liverpool Loop Line looked like before we started. So you imagine 10 miles of that, and that's what it looked like when we'd finished. So really quite big urban challenges. And then the next item in this non-stop run through of how we got to 1995 was really the start of the big inaugural rides, the trailblazing rides. And the first one was organised with Barnsley Borough Council, who had asked us to look at a little railway line in Barnsley. And I remember saying to the chairman, Barnsley was such a miserable place, it wasn't worth doing. But why didn't Barnsley become the centre of a route from Liverpool to Hull? And he thought that was an absolutely great idea. And we all walked from York to Liverpool. Pam Ashton, who was the chairman of Sustrans at one stage, led the walk, and Ron Healy next to her as a trustee. And crucially, all the mayors were assembled to wish us well. And the only problem we had on this ride, when we went through Manchester, there were 5 receptions, and every reception offered champagne. So by the 5th one, we were really not in a fit state. But Barnsley still hosts the Trans-Pennine Trail, which is one of the most significant sections, really, of the national network. And then Groundwork did a huge amount of work. They built all the way up the Taff Trail from Cardiff up to Merthyr. And in West Cumbria, we worked very closely with them. We took over the ownership of all the railways, and their excellent engineer, John Naylor, did all the design work. And that led to the opening of the C2C from Whitehaven to Sunderland in 1992. We got a British Airways award for that, for which somebody had to go to America. And ringing round the staff, we found only one person with a suit. So David Gray had to go. But this became very popular and sort of set the scene for, if you like, the idea of much longer routes. And so this map of 1992 started showing the ideas of how we link all this together. So then what happened, so when we were in 1992, we'd got all the bits in red, probably slightly large, we had built with local authorities. So we'd got stuff everywhere except in Northern Ireland. And so when the lottery came along in 1994, we were able to go to them and say, look, we could deliver a complete national network. Now, I don't know how many of you were on the Inverness to Dover ride. There must be some people here. Few hands? No? One, right, two. The Inverness to Dover ride was the first of the efforts to get every local authority along the way signed up. So every time we went through a local authority area, we had a speech, we gave them something and so on. So by the time we got to Dover, we were able to say to the lottery, look, there were 79 whatever local authorities, there were 10,000 supporters in Sustrans, and so Meatloaf gave me 43 million. I wasn't a fan of Meatloaf at the time, but I became a fan as soon as he gave me the check. And that then, of course, launched a huge amount of work. Simon's here somewhere. Simon had some magnificent spreadsheet, and he would dish out minute sums of money to people like Colwyn Bay, in return for which they had to build all this sort of stuff. And I think you managed, what, 20% altogether? That's all you gave, on average? Well, except for Sustrans. Yeah. So it was very much a team effort, and there were some remarkable individuals in local authorities who built extraordinary stuff. Especially through the urban areas, of course, as a voluntary group, we couldn't do that. So this is at Morecambe, the approach to the pier at Morecambe, coming out from Lancaster, where you were utterly reliant on the highway authorities to deliver the network. And then a lot of other councils came in with other millennium schemes, and in particular built fantastic bridges. This is the Mile End Bridge in London, which became the way to the Olympics. This is the bridge they built over the river at York. This is the Lancaster Bridge, which went over the Lune to take us from Lancaster to Morecambe. This is the rather spectacular bridge they built in Swansea. So, if you like, the national network became a compendium of hundreds and thousands of different schemes, all of which were sort of bound together in this common idea. And one of the key people in that were the Rangers, we called them at the time, because without the signing, the whole network didn't work. So are there any Rangers in the room? Got a few. Simon, 2, 3. And Simon very cleverly got the Department of Transport to accept this sign, which we tacked on everywhere. And if any of you come across these ones with the italics, they're collector's pieces now, so you need to photograph yourself next to them. And I was out cycling with Simon recently, and we found one under a hedge, so we had to clear the hedge and take a photograph. But they're absolutely crucial, and I always felt if Sustrans disappeared, provided the Rangers didn't, then the network would stay in place. And then we used to have annual work camps, which was a way of getting the local community involved. And this was the Nature Conservancy in Scotland, and this was Loch Venacha, those who've been through it. This was the camp supplies coming in by boat, and although it looked pretty rough, the final path is really glorious, and built entirely by hand, no machinery at all. No materials were bought either, because we just went into the glacial remains and pulled them out. And it wasn't until after we'd started that we found out that Loch Venacha had 1,900 millimetres of rain a year. Very wet. This was one you may have worked on locally at Chedzoy, where we built 2 kilometres in 2 weeks. And then there were loads and loads and loads of openings. We tended to have more than one opening, as many openings as we could, really. This is a later opening at Breen to get across the Ayr sluices. And these were all parts of building up the network, which happened. And of course, it's carrying on. So those who come from Bristol, I mean, what you're seeing here at Bristol Bridge is inconceivable all that time ago. All that pink space has been given over to cyclists. Just extraordinary. And of course, city after city are doing this, Leeds, Bradford, and so on. And I hope the national route will constantly move on to these improved routes, so that the national route is always using the best routes that there are. So this is something to cheer about in Bristol, I think. And then just very quickly to round out what we've been doing at Greenways. Greenways started because this gang of people in Weston-super-Mare said they couldn't walk to Breen in the distance for a simple reason. There's a river in the way. And the guy on the left, David Fish, from the council said we've got to do something about it. But Breen was in Somerset. And Somerset absolutely hated cyclists, and we went down to Somerset and we had a meeting. This lady stood up and she said, look, I'm not allowed to talk to you till you give us a bond for £100,000. And we just walked out of the meeting. And we built the route in Somerset largely at night. Well, we took the hedging out at night, didn't we? Sorry. And we took the hedging out at night. So very quickly, this was the work camp at Breen. Then we went over to try and tackle HS2. HS2 is running across those fields in the background. And we said that they should be sorting walking and cycling out. And we forced this route through because it's a bridleway. And it's also the Roman road to Cirencester. And the only way we could be sure we weren't treading on Roman graves was to go straight down the middle of the road, because the Romans buried their dead either side of the road. So we had an archaeologist with us, and he didn't find a single skeleton. He was really upset. Then you may remember we opened Ashton, the route in Ashton Park, some of you will have used. We opened through Tiddenham Tunnel in the Wye Valley. This is the volunteers clearing a rockfall, which they did wonderfully well. Then recently we've been building the Somerset Circle with the Strawberry Line. It's a farm bridge built with railway sleepers. And then last autumn the volunteers put a new bridge in over the main road, a main road in Shepton Mallet. And I only put these up to show that for the national network to thrive, there needs to be dozens and hundreds of groups and councils around the country, all, if you like, contributing their own part. And, of course, that's what we're here to celebrate tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I think we're going to be taking questions in a short time. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about where the network is now and where we want to take it over the next 5 to 10 years. So I've got some slides to take us through that, but thank you, John. And I think that point about it's not about Sustrans or Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust. It's about the communities that the route passes through. It's about local authorities. It's about all the different organisations and people that make it possible. We are but the custodians of the National Cycle Network and the idea of the National Cycle Network. So with that, I'm going to talk about sort of where we are now. So Sustrans, a logo that I'm sure we're all familiar with, and it is changing. So today we published this, which is our new strategy that we've got us taking us all the way out to 2050 with some of our goals and targets. It's certainly going to guide us over the next 5 years. And we have a new name, Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust. And there might be some questions, in fact I know we've got some questions, on why have we changed the name? Why have we changed such a beloved name, and it is beloved, as Sustrans? And one reason is that if I talk to people who know us, I don't need to say what we do. If I talk to anyone who doesn't know us, I absolutely have to explain what we do. And recently I started actually saying, I was sort of not playing a game, it was a bit of an experiment, and I'd say, well, what do you think we do? And some of the answers were quite interesting. So transatlantic, we're involved in transatlantic things. And if you're younger, then your answer is probably going to be, we think you're suspicious of trans people, which is not a great place to be as an organisation. And it's a sign that things move, things change. And so, and it's not because of that we changed, it's because actually we needed, in a world where there's increasingly, there's all sorts of organisations that want attention, that are looking to get people to support them. We need a name that says what we do, a name that speaks to what we are. And so with that, we have our new name, Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust. It is longer, but it is ultimately quite simple, and it speaks very much to what we do and what we're about. And that is fundamentally people-powered movement. And as it says there, it's because people-powered movement really does change everything. I'm preaching to the choir, but we all know that if you move your body to get from A to B, rather than step into a metal box and 1 ton of metal, It has all sorts of benefits for the individual, for everyone immediately around you, and for people all over the world. And we know that, and we want to spread that and spread that to everyone. And that, I think, is at the heart why the people in the room who founded Cyclebag did that almost 50 years ago, and why I think we're all here supporting Sustrans, and I hope now supporting Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust as we go forwards. So that's our strategy. Just another slide on Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust before turning to the NCN. So at the top's our purpose. It's really simple. It's similar to the purpose we've had for the last 10 years. We make it possible, it's previously easy, for everyone to walk, wheel and cycle. And that's what we do. And that is phenomenal. And John has just taken us through picture after picture and story after story of people doing that for the last 50 years, or at least the first 30 years of Sustrans' history. And it does change everything, our health, our well-being, our world. And at the bottom, that point about it adding up into something much bigger, it's one of those things where, you know, a small action, so chipping away at a rock face, builds something that lasts for generations and will change habits, change lives, change communities. And again, that's why I joined Sustrans, and I imagine it's why many of us support Sustrans. So here's our organisation on a page. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. Stuff on the left we've spoken about. I just want to talk about the strategic goals in the middle there. So the first one, building a national walking, wheeling, cycling network, I'm going to talk about in a minute. We've got two others, so just to reference those. The second one is connected, thriving neighbourhoods. So we're not just focusing on the National Cycle Network, big and large though it is. We are also working in neighbourhoods. And of course, Sustrans created the first home zone here in Bristol in the Dings, just the other side of Bristol, many years ago. And so one of the things we want to do is work with housing developers, with the housing industry, to ensure that walking, wheeling and cycling is baked into housing development from the get-go. 1.5 million new homes. If you've got to own a car or 2 cars to actually live in them, they're not going to make much use. They're baking in car dependency. We've started work to change that. We want to do more on that. So that's one of the things we'll be doing there. Second thing is schools and children, a rich heritage of working with schools and children. We helped popularise school streets across the UK. We will be doing more on that over the years to come. And then lastly, and again, going back to sort of Sustrans' history, Sustrans has a clear link to the railways, and as a secret railway fan, that's part of the appeal for me. But also Sustrans has done a lot of work around public transport, integrating public transport. And so the third thing we want to do under Connected Thriving Neighbourhoods is work to make longer journeys possible for everyone by better integrating walking, wheeling and cycling with buses, trains, trams, light rail, etc. And we've got examples of that across the country, but we think we can do far more. And then lastly, empowering millions to walk, wheel and cycle, which includes encouraging and empowering millions of people to support us with voice, with time, and yes, with money. Also to ensure that politicians, regardless of political party, want to make it easier, make it possible for people to walk, wheel and cycle. And in today's sort of divisive environment, that is no mean feat, but one that we believe we can achieve working with partners. And also under empowering is making sure that this is for everyone. You will have seen from the video at the start that this is about being for everyone, and people who might not think the National Cycle Network is for them, discovering it too, and I'll say more about that later. So, John has shown some fantastic stories and photos and maps of the NCN history, and I'm just going to sort of share a short animation that shows how the National Cycle Network has developed from those sort of red marks on a page that John shared over the years, and how it's grown over the 30 years, and how we'd like it to grow it beyond that. So the network grew rapidly, and then it sort of stabilised, and then we did take bits of the network out, which I'll speak more about. But we do have a plan to grow it again and grow it further through to 2055. We have a network development plan, an NDP, of course it has an abbreviation, and that is a rich document that shows where we would like the National Cycle Network to go, linking up towns, I believe, of conurbations or settlements of greater than 30,000 people, and it goes right down to individual scheme level where we've got the schemes. And back to John's sort of the sleight of hand that John played with government when they gave him money to go away, and he basically wrote his project plan for the next 10 years. back when I joined Sustrans, we hadn't had government funding for the National Cycle Network in England for quite some time. We were getting it in Scotland. And there was a sense of, well, we can't do anything until we've got the money. And learning from John, it was like, well, no one's going to give you money unless you've got an idea, unless you've got something you want to do. And so as part of the reports that we published in 2018, Paths for Everyone, and the next one was 3 years later, there were 55 activation projects, we called them, which were schemes that we wanted to do, that spoke to how we wanted the network to be, which was Paths for Everyone. And 5 years later, 6 years later, all of those schemes and many more were developed, because this is something that people see the value of and want to do. And when you put the scheme down, when you scope it out and do it, people want to do it. Now, one thing to say about these reports, so these are 2 reports we put out. The first one, I remember when we launched that in Parliament, and I mentioned, it'd been on the press the previous day, and I got a call from my head of external affairs at the time who said, Xavier, you might want to look at the Times. And it was sort of a Gerald Ratner moment, because in the interview about this report we were putting out about Paths for Everyone, I'd said that, you know, we really do need to do something because everyone knows where the crap bits are. And the headline was basically, you know, charity chief executive calls his own network crap. But actually, it did more good than harm, because there was a recognition that we were being honest about the state of the network and taking our role as custodians seriously. And we then brought people together around that. And we brought people together to build this strategy and to build that plan. And then working with others, and now having the support of, so there was some goodwill that came out of that. We actually got government were offering us money to turn these activation projects into reality, not least because I would point out that Scotland were giving us money, but England weren't, which always helps. And 6-7 years later, we improved 500 miles of national cycle network, either with new path or resurfacing, building path, and develop more projects, more pipeline. Because that thing about having a pipeline of projects to do is absolutely critical. I'm looking at Matt over there, who now has this long pipeline of projects. And one of the beauties of the National Cycle Network when it comes to attracting government funding is that it is everywhere. It spans across the whole of the UK, and it serves lots of different communities. And governments come and go, as we know, and they have different priorities. And you can bet that the National Cycle Network will be able to serve those priorities. And not only that, but in serving those priorities, will join up communities, will have benefit and will have value. This isn't just about sort of, you know, working the system to get money. This is something that truly connects people and that truly does good and that answers so many of the issues we face as society. So that Paths for Everyone is how we were talking about the National Cycle Network. What I'd like to take you through now is what's set out in our new strategy and some examples of what that means to me as well. So the first strategic goal is building. So building a national walking, wheeling and cycling network that brings everyone close to the places and people they love. That's our headline for the National Cycle Network, that point about bringing people closer to places and people that they love. And then there are 4 themes under that. So fix it, or 4 sub-goals. Fix it, love it, green it, and connect it. And so I'm going to take us through each of those. So the first one is fix it, which is kind of obvious, and this does include growing it. We've set targets for 2030 of 1,000 new and improved miles. It's ambitious. We've done 500 in just over the last 6 or 7 years. We now want to do 1,000, but we have a head of steam. We have now got a better pipeline, so we believe that is possible. We also want to see every single barrier on the National Cycle Network removed or redesigned. There are over 13,000 barriers on the National Cycle Network. That's approximately 1 for every mile, and they are blatantly discriminatory. They are often put in to keep motorcycles out. The motorcycles get in everywhere, and what they do is they stop legitimate users. And we've set the ambitious target of getting rid of every single one, because they should not be on there. We'd also like to have 5 exemplar projects to transform women's safety on traffic-free paths. We know that many of the paths go through areas that can feel really quite unsafe at night, and it restricts usage to only some people, and that is not right. So and we've done work where we conduct audits. We did an audit in Wales to look at women's safety along a particular bit of the NCN. We'd like now to put some of that theory into action and have 5 exemplar projects by 2030. It will be great to have even more than 5. Part of the challenge around that is lighting, as we know, and other issues where bats can take precedent over people in some circumstances, but we found ways around that, as John has found ways around that in tunnels. So there's more we can do here. And again, on all of these, when I say we, that's Sustrans working with communities, working with local authorities, working with national governments. We cannot do this as, Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust. That's £5 in the swear box, isn't it? So, and I've put this up. This is a collection of sort of images, we all love a before and after image. John's were fantastic. These are less dramatic, but I think they tell the story of the barrier removal and the resurfacing that we've been able to do. So the top left is Didcot. No, it's not, sorry, it's Plymouth. The right-hand side is Didcot, some resurfacing, and the bottom left is Hereford, where we're removing barriers, or the top left one's a great example. You do not need all of that stonework. You can put a simple sort of metal removable bollard in there to stop vehicles going down it. And the other thing, of course, is the resurfacing. And just a story about the resurfacing. What we found with the resurfacing in, actually going back to Barnsley, John, so near Barnsley on the Transpennine Trail, they have a fantastic rights of way team or rights of way individual in Barnsley. And we work with them using funding from Active Travel England to resurface a part of the Transpennine Trail that's actually got quite a gradient on it, so it's quite hard to resurface. And we put down this recycled material made out of old tyres, old car tyres, produced near Barnsley. So it's a recycled material. It's porous, which means you don't get, when you get the tree roots coming up because the roots are trying to search for water, you don't get that because the water can get through it. And we did counts of usage before and after, and there was an increase in the walking, an increase in the cycling, but there was something like a 300% increase in other use. So what is other? Well, other is mobility scooters, it's wheelchairs. Because you can walk on that muddy path. If you don't mind getting your tyres muddy and they're not too narrow, you can ride a bike down it, but you cannot take a mobility scooter down there, you cannot take a wheelchair down there, and that is what we mean by wheeling. And that is increasingly, as we age as a population, as we get more aware of needing to serve everyone, that becomes more and more important. And so the power of resurfacing is huge. It's not always uncontroversial, back to sort of John's example from the Bristol Post. And there are examples of people from the cycling industry and our sector who I know who have opposed us creating paths and surfacing paths because it goes through their sort of backyard, if you like. But it is absolutely vital that we do this to open up these paths to everyone, not just those of us who are able to walk down a muddy path like that. And often the fear is that they're going to create a cycle superhighway, which they don't. They enable a whole raft of different people to enjoy it. So that's Fix It. Love it. So the National Cycle Network is loved, and we would like to see it loved by more, locally loved, embraced by all, as it says. So we have an ambitious target of 1 million people engaged in the National Cycle Network through community organisations and volunteering. We've done great work to engage more and different community organisations across the network. There were some examples of those in the video. We want to see more volunteering in the network. Like all charities, times are tough, but we would like to grow our volunteering and do more of that with our current volunteers, with new volunteers. We know that younger people, for example, want to give their time in smaller doses and maybe don't want to become a volunteer to a particular organisation but want opportunities for micro-volunteering. So we're working with other organisations to make that possible. The middle one, we want everyone to be able to confidently and easily plan their trip on any of the NCN and then tell everyone how great it was. John mentioned the signage. One thing that we're involved in, which is a nascent project, it's just getting going, really exciting, is a UK-wide project around wayfinding and network classification. So it's really obvious where networks are, how they're signed for all walkers, wheelers and cyclists. And that's something we'll be working on over the coming years with other organisations. And that includes improving the signage on the NCN. And then the third one is 10 community-led extensions or enhancements delivered on the National Cycle Network. John talked about the work of Greenways and Cycleroutes on working with communities and Weston-super-Mare that got Greenways and Cycleroutes going. And before that, the way that Sustrans has worked with local communities. And I think it's something that actually we've not done as well now as we have done in the past. And it's something that I'd like to see us do more of, is to work with community groups to deliver projects that link into the National Cycle Network. And just as an example of that, that's Frome Missing Link. And I remember going to see Frome Missing Link in my first month or so as CEO in a pub in Frome. One, I thought Frome was lovely. Two, I got quite a grilling. That is the opening of, I think, phase 2 of the Missing Link. I'm sure there are people. Who's on that photo in this room? Are there people on that photo in this room? Oh, that didn't work, did it? No hands. Okay. But I know Matt lives in Frome. But we'd like to see more of these, more community groups building paths supported by Sustrans. We're working out what that means, how we do that best, and also learning from and talking with John on that. And so Love It means ensuring it's there for everyone and keeping that linkage to local communities, which is so important. Because the other thing for me about the NCN is it's a national network, and the fact it's a national network carries heft. It's really impressive to think that the route that goes past where I live, Route 4, goes all the way from, I think, London through to Fishguard. But it's also local. So the Strawberry line is a local route. The Cuckoo line is a local route. And it's that local bit as well that really matters. So our third one is Green It. So a network that helps rebuild nature and connects everyone to it. So increasingly, there's awareness that not everyone has access to nature, and you tend to have better access to nature if you're better off, essentially. And oftentimes, the National Cycle Network is nature. It's an urban corridor, a green corridor, and it provides access to more nature. It's a way of getting out of town. So the Bristol Bath Path is a great example, but there are many others. And one of the things that we're involved with is attempts to create a UK-wide strategic nature network. And one of the driving forces for this is the Environment Director at National Highways, a guy called Steve Elderkin. Steve started his working life at Sustrans, way before I was here, and he's now the Environment Director at National Highways. And it was the NCN that was his inspiration for creating a strategic nature network made up of nature restoration and renewal at scale, joined up so species can migrate and move between the different areas of it, with bridges over motorways and railways, nature bridges that join it all up. And my point was we have to put people into that as well. This can't be some green thing that people aren't allowed to touch, something elitist. And what better to give people access to that than the National Cycle Network? So the National Cycle Network's a core part of that, and we will help make that strategic nature network happen. And then lastly, we'd like to develop 5 sector leading projects on the NCN, showing how climate resilience and low carbon structure can be built into active travel. We think that active travel is all, that walking, cycling is a really carbon neutral, climate friendly way of getting around. It absolutely is, but it often involves a lot of concrete, and that has quite a significant cost. And on the other side, it is infrastructure, especially where it's built on Victorian railway lines, that is subject to the same pressures that our rail and road system are from climate change: flooding, subsidence, land drying out. And actually, a lot of what we're doing on the National Cycle Network, we believe has learnings for other infrastructure owners around what can be done, and we can learn from them. And we'd like to show through some projects like the one in Barnsley that I mentioned using recycled tyres, how we can innovate and how we can lead the way. John was very modest earlier. A lot of what John has done is groundbreaking in terms of sort of the way that John and his team have solved engineering problems over the years, and we've got a reputation for that as a consequence. We're still doing great stuff. I think we could do even more of it. So I've got an example of Green It that also speaks to the next one. So that's in Scotland. That is the Stockenfield Bridge, and I just snapped that on my phone when I was there in July. It is absolutely stunning. And you wouldn't know that that is one of the most deprived wards of Glasgow. And that bridge, funded by Transport for Scotland, built by Scottish Canals with us over the last 5 years or so, is at a junction of 3 canals effectively, and it links up 3 areas that previously you could not get to. There was the canal in the way across 3 of them. So this certainly illustrates connection, and builds on the bridges that John showed earlier. Also, you can't quite see it, but the base of that column, which is holding a purpose, it's serving up the bridge, has got community artwork all the way around it. So the community were involved in it. And it is a beautiful place to be. I was there on a particularly sunny afternoon, but it's a lovely place to be, and it is providing access to nature. It is absolutely green space in an area that really needs it. It's beautifully planted. I'm not even sure it's planted. It looks more like it's just happened. And it's connecting places. And that takes me on to the third one, or the last one, rather, the fourth one, connect it. So it's such an obvious thing to say, but the National Cycle Network needs to be a connector. It needs to take us to where we want to go. And it needs to connect people not just to places, but to opportunity and to each other. So our first target, again, an ambitious target, is to connect 1 million people currently experiencing social and economic disadvantage to opportunities, whether that's jobs, education, services, or local services, through the NCN. A lot of the National Cycle Network passes through more deprived areas in our towns and cities, and as well as providing green space, it can provide linkages to places. And there's also the fact that many people who the National Cycle Network's nearby might not think it's for them. Back to sort of walking, wheeling, cycling. Cycling can be seen as something, especially nowadays, that's for middle-class people. It's not something for people who maybe have got trouble accessing a bike. The second one is ensuring that the NCN is at the heart of a fully integrated set of UK walking, wheeling, cycling networks. You might have seen an announcement by the mayors, by a group of mayors in England at the start of the summer about creating a national network. Is that different to this National Cycle Network? Well, actually, it's a bit silly to talk about single networks. What we need is a collection of different networks. The NCN can't go everywhere. It can't serve all of Bristol. Bristol needs its own network. What we need is to coherently link up these networks so people can make sense of them and know what they're getting. And that's something that we'll be working on others with over the next 5 years. And then lastly, improving the connection of 50 public transport interchanges to the NCN. Back to the origins of the NCN, one thing that I know John and the early developers of the National Cycle Network wanted to see was it serving railway stations along the route. So it could replace car travel, or if people wanted to go on a leisure trip, they didn't have to take their car. We want to do far more about that. We're at a point where the government is going soon to publish an integrated national transport strategy in England. Scotland and Wales already have theirs. There's great opportunity, and we're working with a train operator in England to do more on that already. So, an exciting one, and again, one that speaks to Sustrans roots. So those are the four goals we've got for the National Cycle Network over the coming years. I haven't got the detailed network development plan, and I know there are many people in the room who would like to see it, and we need to make it more accessible than it is. It is accessible, but not as accessible as it could be. But happy to take questions on that. The last thing is, I just want to share a picture. I don't think you shared this one, John. You shared the ones on the left, but I love that picture on the right, because I love the way that people are staring at these strange people cycling, wondering what's going on. And the way that it cuts through the different urban layers of Bristol there. You've got people. John, where is it?
It's the view from Devon Road.
There. Yeah. And it's one of the openings, isn't it?
You can just see Temple Leeds right at the far end.
Yeah. And that path is so well used. We've had to widen the path. We've had to work out how to ensure that walkers, cyclists, wheelers can still use it safely, together with children who cross the path not that far from there. Because it is so popular and so well used, what we didn't want to do was fully segregate the path. We've segregated it in places, but we haven't segregated the whole thing. Because actually, there's something for me about people sharing space together that gets to the heart of what the network's about and what Sustrans is about. That's not suitable for everywhere, but there are places, especially places that aren't so heavily trafficked, where actually people negotiating space together, acknowledging each other, saying thank you, saying hi, gets to the heart of what it means to be human. And that, to me, is ultimately what the network's about, what Sustrans is about, because we believe that how we get around should improve how we live. It's not just a matter of getting from A to B. So with that, thank you. And I'll invite John up, because I think we're going to take some questions now. I better, so can I introduce Katie? So Katie Arts-Tween, have I pronounced your name correctly?
Katie 80 is easier.
Katie 80.
Yeah.
So Katie is our volunteering director, and Katie is going to compare the next session and ask us questions.
Yeah.
And,
In the ease of time, we've collated quite a large number of questions that have come in from people online and in the room. So I've got those written down here, and we're going to sit down and kind of ask Xavier and John their answers. I think, do I
don't know, you can hear us go down.
Yeah.
You're less foreboding.
We'll speak all the time, won't we? So shall I go in the middle? Okay. The first question is actually for you, John, so I'll be passing this back in just a moment. But this came in from Ian, and it's just reflecting back to the 1970s and where the story began. And what was the main difference that Sustrans and other cycle campaign groups at that time brought to cycle campaigning back in the 1970s?
We had a terrible trouble in the early days when the cycling groups as a whole felt that this was a government job. Every other country in Europe was building routes, but it was the governments building it. And so when we started building routes, we were slightly condemned, actually, because we were thought to be undermining local authorities and undermining government. And it does remain an anomaly, I would say, isn't it, that in Britain we're just still having to soldier on as a campaign groups doing this sort of thing. Whereas if you go to France or Holland or Switzerland, you'll find wonderful networks put in place by the government. So I think there was a dichotomy in the early days, and it's probably still there. But we just got on and did it, partly because I'm afraid I just like building routes. So
it's a good job you do, for all of us. I don't know, Xavier, if you've got any reflections on that too.
Yeah, I remember talking to John about this, and John, I think you said to me that you thought the cycle campaigners needed a delivery arm. Which I rather liked, the idea of actually getting out there and delivering change on the ground. And I think that it's getting better in this country when I think about the changes there have been over the last 20 years. John was sharing what's happened in Bristol, yeah, and London's seen huge progress, and many other places have. And I think it's a question of time, and it takes time, and it takes a bit of imagination, but only a bit. But I remember before this, I worked at Transport for London, and I led work on the new walking cycling strategy back in 2007. And I remember talking to people, even within Transport for London, and I would get this sort of, can't do that here. This is London, we're not Amsterdam, you know. And you look at London now, and the cycle superhighways, and what's been achieved in London, and it's been achieved over more than 20 years with, if not consistent leaders all consistently committed to making cycling better, consistent funding, and political will, and it takes time for that to happen. But what's interesting is I remember when I started at Sustrans, and I talk about London a bit too much, and I soon learned to stop that. But you'd talk about it, and I'd get the same, which is, you can't talk about London here. You know, we're not London, we're Manchester. It's never going to happen here. And then you look at Manchester. And there's something where, and one of the beauties of what Sustrans does is that we work and have worked across the UK, back to John's early maps, because it's all very well to talk in theory about it, or show a map, or show what's happening in Amsterdam or London, but until people see, feel, hear it, touch it, it's not the same. And there's something really powerful about that, about being a group and working with communities and bringing routes. And as I said at the start, showing that it's possible to make it better. Look at this. Like the post editor walking sheepishly along the path and using it.
Thank you both. Xavier, you've obviously talked already about the name change and the why now and why change. There were a lot of questions that came in about this, so I thought it's worth just touching on it again, just to kind of say those can be kind of collated in as to why now, why change, and there was also a lot of questions about why include wheel. So yeah, it'd be good to just hear a bit more about that.
Why now? It's been a long time coming. I think this is something, I was talking to somebody earlier who said this has been debated for years. And it's the sort of thing that can be debated for years, and then you just need to do it, don't you? One of the people I spoke to when I applied for the job was the transport journalist, Christian Walmar. And he said, well, first thing, you've got to change the name. It's a stupid name. You've got to change the name. I was like, well, I'm not sure I'm going to do that in my first year as CEO. It's taken a while. But, and it's not been easy to change the name, not least because when you see the possible alternative names, you hope there's something there. That's the one, amazing. To be perfectly frank, that didn't happen. But that's not surprising because it's changed and you're getting used to it. And I've spoken about why, the fact that it's important to have a name where you don't then need to spend a few minutes explaining what you do, because that's not how communication works, especially nowadays, if ever. On the wheeling, so wheeling is a term that is increasingly coming to mean transport through, active travel, if you like, that's not walking, not cycling, a wheelchair or a mobility scooter. It can mean other things, such as using a scooter. It doesn't mean motorised transport. Of course, you could quibble and say a mobility scooter is motorised transport, but it's increasingly becoming now a term that speaks to disabled people in particular. It's not one we use lightly. We talked about using it a few years ago. It was less current. I think it's now more adopted. We're not a disabled people's organisation, but I know our use of it has been welcomed by organisations like Transport for All that are disabled people's organisations.
And John, it would be great to hear what you think of the new name.
Well, I think it covers pretty well everything, and like Xavier, I think you do have to explain names, and I'd quite like a catchier one. But I think it says what it's setting out to do, so I'm very happy with it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to stick on the theme of names. I don't know if Marcus from Canals and Rivers Trust is with us. Hey, Marcus. I know that you've put in a question here, and I'll read it word for word, Marcus, how you wrote it. But as we mark this significant anniversary, and with the rebranded Walk Wheel Cycle Trust being more reflective of the diverse communities of users of the National Cycle Network, is now the right time to also review the name National Cycle Network to clarify and promote it as an inclusive path for everyone? That's a question to both of you.
This is a really tricky one. For instance, we're working on the Somerset Circle, which includes the Strawberry Line and is a 70-mile circle the authorities have put together. And some sections will not be suitable for walkers because they will, for example, be on minor country roads. And Somerset's aiming to introduce, I think, 7 or 8 rural quiet roads where they're going to either ban through traffic altogether or take it down to very slow speeds. Now, those roads still won't be really suitable for walkers. So the Somerset Circle is going to include some sections of the circle where the walkers are on a different route altogether, on the Fossway through Downside or something of that sort. So I'm not sure about this. I think the National Cycle Network is doing what it's saying. It is fundamentally a route that people can cycle and that many, many other people can use as well. But I don't think it pretends to be a full network for walkers. We've got the most fantastic public rights-of-way network in Britain. What is it, 140,000 miles of public footpaths. So I think if you go back to the Countryside Commission, who were a major funder in the early days, they had a remit to put in place the long-distance walking routes we know about, the coastal footpath, the Pennine Trail, and they actually had a remit to put in one long-distance cycle route, which they never did. And so there's always been this dichotomy between pedestrians and cyclists, and I completely applaud your view that we should be building shared use paths wherever we can, but that I don't think means the network as a whole. Of course, your canal routes are shared pretty well everywhere, aren't they? So there's not a problem, but they don't go everywhere, your canals, and they don't even connect. I mean, you can't get from Trowbridge to Abingdon or somewhere like that because you forgot to repair that bit of canal, and so on. So I think your routes are a wonderful example of shared use, but I think the National Cycle Network is an entity which is worth holding on to.
Well, I'll start by saying what a valued partner the Canal River Trust is and how wonderful your canals are, even the bits that don't quite connect. But in all seriousness, I mean, it's a good example of the partnership, and where, you know, we only own quite a few miles, and they're quite expensive miles to look after, of the National Cycle Network, but it's largely on other people's land. It's a good question. We know from the numbers we collect, which is not perfect data, that there are more people walking on the network than cycling. Going back to those Paths for Everyone reports I was showing earlier, you might have noticed they didn't lead with somebody cycling. There was no lycra. I remember giving a talk at some networking event in London, and I mentioned, you know, somebody asked me what I did, and I explained, and then I explained quickly what Sustrans meant. And I got the look of death, you know, this death stare from this person. When I mentioned cycling. And then I just pulled out the copy of the report and started talking, and she immediately relaxed her shoulders, because cycling is divisive. It's been a target in the culture wars, and that can make it challenging. It doesn't mean it's right that it's divisive, but it can be divisive. So if you're calling something the National Cycle Network, that means that some people can definitely feel it's not for them. So you've got a similar problem with Sustrans, where people might get the wrong idea about what it's about. On the other hand, there are two really critical words in there, national and network. And we certainly ain't going to call it the National Active Travel Network, not on my watch anyway. Horrible, it sounds like a prescription. And I think there's a real challenge about what you do call it and how you keep the heft. And, you know, the National Walk and Cycle and Wheel Network, no. So I suppose the final thing I say, I think we do need to look at the name. I think we do. But I don't think, unlike the name of the charity, which, if you like, is the Charities to Change, the networks is not Walk, Wheel, Cycle Trust to Change. So I think how we do that needs some careful thought. I do think that we need to change the name, but I don't think it's a question of going to a brand consultancy and doing some research and focus groups and saying, how can you do this? I think we need to involve our stakeholders in that, and the users and all the rest, and come up with something that still has heft. And it might be that the best thing is still the National Cycle Network.
Can I just pick up on the canals, because it is fascinating. In the early days of British Waterways, we undertook to only use your towpaths where there was no alternative. In other words, it wasn't the first choice. It was, and then secondly, the awful state of your canal at Avonscliff led to huge funding opportunities, because the Countryside Commission came to inspect a little project we were wanting to do, and the canal bank was so muddy, he and his papers in his briefcase went into the canal, and I fished him out, and he approved the grant. So I'm always grateful for the bad state of your canal at Avon.
John, did he approve the grant before you fished him out?
But it is worth, those of you who need to go back to the whole of your canal system, was, you know, in British Waterways days, the dredgings would be put on the towpath. So in the winter, they would become a slimy mess. And in the summer, they were hard and rutted. And so we've really got to say there have been fantastic change British Waterways, and now you, have done on the network to create these wonderful paths. But what was it, 50 years ago, they were largely impassable for much of the year, until you pushed this guy in. It was really good.
Not a tactic, we'll keep trying. Xavier, you spoke a lot about the ambition of the National Cycle Network and its growth, and we've looked at how it's kind of grown over the years. In terms of, we had a question in from Pete asking, is the development of the National Cycle Network going fast enough to meet climate targets? And if not, what more can be done?
Well, no, is a simple answer. But frankly, if that plan we've got, if we built that tomorrow, it wouldn't make a fundamental difference in and of itself to climate change targets. So let's not kid ourselves, yeah. That's not to say that walking, cycling, wheeling doesn't have a massive role to play as part of adapting to a low to no carbon future. And that's why actually we're also looking at working it with house building, with interchange with public transport, because walking and cycling, and the network itself is not the answer. It's got to be properly integrated in. So I think there's a wider thing to play. I guess, is there enough funding, enough political will to make the change that we need to get the country walking, cycling, wheeling rather than driving? It's got a lot better than it has done, but there's still an awful long way to go. And the divisive nature of transport, it's like food, isn't it? It's quite a divisive thing to talk about because it strikes to the core of sort of daily habits and who we are. So, and in that, it's like it was in the 70s. But John gave the example of the canals. If you look at now at the cycle infrastructure we've got in this country compared to the 70s, let alone, or just 20 years ago, it's fundamentally different. And I feel a lot safer cycling on roads than I did 20 years ago. I mean, other people might have different experiences. So I remain an optimist, but no, it's not going fast enough. And, it's the same thing if, you need to start yesterday and keep going.
I think it is just worth remembering the one thing, though, Xavier, and that is everybody can walk and cycle, or walk or cycle. And so what you're doing on the network, and on every time you build a path, you are giving individuals the chance to make their own small contribution. And there are not many other areas you can do it. You can't change the food system, particularly you can't change the electricity suppliers and so on. But you can walk and cycle if you're given half a chance. So in that sense, I think the network is unduly influential.
Thank you. Yeah, completely. And it goes back to that thing about making the future possible and here and now and showing what it's like. And back to sort of the politics of climate change and the psychology of climate change, it can all feel a bit hopeless. And if you can't afford to put a ground source heat pump in and all of that, but you can afford to make that difference and make that change, and you can show that it's possible. And again, back to sort of the politics of it, doing something that is local, that serves people locally, is hugely powerful and can bring people together rather than push them apart.
I'm going to take that theme of local community, because I know that I had a question from Greg about what are the main lessons that you've both of you have learned from engaging with communities for better active travel infrastructure, or any memorable interactions that changed how you view community engagement?
Well, certainly I can say that in Greenways we now only work if there's a good, a positive local group on the ground. You can't work in a vacuum. So the Strawberry Line has, I think, now 5, maybe 6 large local groups who are out there, like there's a Wednesday fencing team that fence every single Wednesday throughout the year. And so you've got commitment at a local level. And that's why we in Greenways run annual camps, because it gets the local community involved. So I think it's absolutely crucial that you get the community involved in building, in maintaining and in extending the network, because then, as Xavier said earlier, you'll have a community that love it. Whereas if you just get the local authority come in and put some tarmac down, well, it's probably going to be trashed, isn't it? So I think community involvement is not only crucial, but it should be at the start of every scheme. And we try, if any group, I think somebody from Chichester here was talking to me earlier, can we put a route together in Chichester and so on? You have to have groups. Otherwise, how do you start? Vital.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it speaks to sort of to what Sustrans is all about, which is not imposing things on people, which doesn't say that everybody will think it's wonderful what we do. It's working with people to understand different needs. And increasingly, there's an awareness, often more in theory than practice, that we need to design in an inclusive way. And we need to design for everyone. And that is really hard because you get to a point of competing needs. But we have to try and do that. And you can only do that if you talk to people about how to do that. And we had somebody who epitomised that in Sustrans. It was Sustrans, because sadly that person's no longer with us. And Marcus was in our South team as a designer, an urban designer, and he also worked with the Design Council. And he worked on the Bristol Bath project, and he listened to people, and he really wanted to understand what drove people's different needs, and to make it possible, in so much as it is possible, to really design for everyone. So I think you can't build something for people without people being involved. And sometimes we do that really well, sometimes we do it less well, but I think it's always at the core of what we're about and what we seek to do, which is to build paths for people, and that means working with people and engaging them. And it's something, back to sort of the community roots, that we'd like to do more from the very inception of projects, as well as when we're in the process of doing one.
Yeah, cake's important. If you have a good local group, all negotiating is done by volunteers with cakes.
Oh, sorry.
Cakes again. Cakes are really important. So when we have a problem on our paths, we send the volunteers in with a cake. So last year we smashed a greenhouse accidentally when a tractor threw a tree into an allotment. The woman quite reasonably wrote to the council and said her greenhouse was damaged, and long letter. Somebody went round with a cake the next morning. Half an hour later, this woman's mother, who was in Inverness, said she'd fly down to fix it herself because she was a greenhouse fixer expert and could be finished the path quickly, and the cake was very nice. Really important cake.
Great lesson there, thank you. Brian asked about the fact, well, he said, I'm sure there's been many significant achievements associated with Cyclebag and Sustrans, but what stands out for you as being the most memorable achievement?
Do you know, this is an easy one to answer, because for me, the most memorable project is the project I'm building at this very moment in time. And I always think the best project is the one that's happening right now. And I always have this idea, it's going to be the best project we've ever built. So those of you who are going to Shepton Mallet, please go there. You'll see the route we've just built on the Somerset and Dorset. It's my favourite project. And on clear days, you can see Glastonbury and Exmoor, and it's just wonderful. And I don't know what my favourite project will be next, but that's my favourite one at the moment. And so really, it's so, as Xavier said it, it's, you know, there are these grand things that think you are wonderful, but it's actually this small detail that's made a change in that small community, and you've done it as well as you can. I think that's memorable for me.
Thank you.
I guess, yeah, I mean, follow that. I think for me it is actually the idea of a national cycle network, you know, as an achievement. That is huge. And then everything that goes with that, and the fact that is legacy. John talked about, you know, if there was no more Sustrans and you still got the Rangers, I would say if there were no more volunteers and no more organising, you know, I suppose it's John's point, you'd still have people who would want to look after the paths. You'd still have the paths, they'd still be there. And also it's repurposing something that was old and no longer needed in the shape of the railways and where they go across the railways, and to be able to repurpose that and do something else with it, and to acknowledge the path in the way you do that, and to look to the future and build what we need for the future of this country and the future of, well, of the globe, is hugely powerful, that connection of past, present and future, of local, of national. And it's just really joyous. And I remember cycling when I first experienced the NCN, going down to, after getting the tandem off the train, something you can't really do now very easily, and cycling down to Padstow along that old railway line, I was absolutely gobsmacked. This is amazing. And I felt like royalty going across that bridge. And that's a feeling that it's, you know, that's a feeling I remember.
Thank you. That actually does bring me to the end of my questions in my book. I don't know, I think we might have time for a couple in the room. If might have to do a roving mic exercise, I can do that. There we go.
Di's going to rove. Here we are.
Let's start here.
Yeah, Mark Weston from the British Horse Society. It's not a question, but on behalf of horse riders, I would just like to say 3 congratulations to Sustrans. Firstly, to John for including a picture of a horse rider on the National Cycle Network. Thank you very much. Secondly, congratulations on the vision of Paths for Everyone. That really makes a difference to horse riders. And thirdly, congratulations in respect of your barrier removal programme, because by that you are saving the lives of horse riders and horses. And as you know, we're happy to contribute financially to those projects where we can and where they're going to save horse riders and riders' lives, as we did on the Lias line. So many congratulations from horse riders, and may your next 30 years be even more fruitful.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating, particularly the history. I hadn't realised quite so much involvement of the railways. And my question is about railways. I'd always imagined that using old railways for paths was also a way of saving that route so it could be used as a railway again. It prevents buildings being put awkwardly in the way. So my question is, have any Sustrans paths actually been turned back into railways?
That's a really good question. In the very early days, that was one of our ambitions, to maintain the continuity of railway formations against this very eventuality. And in fact, we bought the old railway between Bathgate and Adrie in Scotland because it was under threat for being split up into hundreds of parcels. And we put a path down it. And 10 years later, a wonderful railway has been built along that route. And as part of the project, a new path has been built adjacent to the railway. So it won't often always happen, but I completely support your view that the loss of the continuity of railways in 1966, there were members of Parliament who said that the whole lot should go into some sort of Greenways trust and be kept against future eventuality, but of course they were ignored by government. And so we've lost so much, and it's so hard to negotiate them back. But one of the reasons in the very early documents of Sustrans you'll find is maintaining the through routes for future transport. Now, there have been cases like in Bristol where the council wanted to bang a tramway up the Bristol and Bath path and eliminate the cyclists and walkers as opposed to dual use. And of course, we rightly condemned that and campaigned against it. And we sold all the bits we owned in 10-metre strips to people around the world to make it hard to negotiate. So there are people in New Zealand and Canada who own bits of the Bristol and Bath path. But that's not to say we wouldn't support a metro going down it if it had a parallel path next to it. So really good question.
The great thing about using old railway lines and old canal routes is that they have virtually no hills. Canals have not at all, except for the locks, and railways 1 in 40 gradients at worst, at best. How many miles are there still left that could actually be returned to use by cyclists and walkers? Both railway lines and canals that have been abandoned.
I can't speak for the canals, but I mean, broadly speaking, there are thousands of miles out there, but they're owned by thousands of people. And we've got quite a lot of authorities. Somerset is one, which in their local plans say no, you can't develop the railway system because they're used for future transport. But that doesn't really mean anything if you're a farmer, if you're cattle on it. So I'm afraid to get them back, you would need a government initiative. You'd need a new bill of parliament that said anything that was a railway or canal, you can recover. And that would make our life much, much easier. Because at the moment, we're relying on voluntary negotiation. I mean, only last year, I met a landowner in Somerset who threw a grenade at me because, he thought that was a good way to start a conversation. These sorts of things happen. And, other landowners point their shotguns at you. So it's quite hard work negotiating and so on. But there are thousands of miles that you could recover. But then don't forget they come with viaducts, they come with tunnels, I mean, in Wales, they're hoping to open the Rhondda Tunnel, which is 3.5 miles long. The Queensbury Tunnel, you've heard at Halifax, you know, which apparently is so dangerous to walk through if you cough, a brick falls out of the ceiling. Stuff like that, you know, they're level, but they have huge liabilities, which you have to overcome. And we ourselves in Greenways have a number of viaducts. How many viaducts you've got? I think it's about 80, isn't it?
You bought quite a few, John.
Yeah, I like my viaducts. That was good. You were pleased I bought them, aren't you? Yeah, that's right. See, reluctance there. But Hengoed Viaduct, have you been over it? South Wales, absolutely wonderful. And there are other spectacular viaducts, aren't there? So, yeah, there's a lot there, but we need somebody who's very, very wealthy to just buy the whole lot back. So are you that person?
We've probably got time for one more question.
Hello, Sophie Gordon from Cycling UK. What you were saying, John, about kind of starting with a keen community group and being led by what people want to do, I think is a really good way of approaching it if you're a small group. But then I was also wondering, does that lead to building paths in more privileged areas where people have the spare time and the skills to kind of form this campaigning group and volunteer? And how do we balance that, I suppose, as a question for both of you, and make sure that we're building them in places where people need them most?
Well, I mean, obviously building in urban areas is very difficult for voluntary groups because that is the job of local authorities. And I think we can build where we can and then hope that that influences the local authorities to go further. I think that's about all I can say. It really is difficult, but I wouldn't want to turn down a group just because they're well organised and they live in Bishop's Lydiard or somewhere like that, you know, as opposed to Street. I mean, Street doesn't have any organised groups and it's definitely disadvantaged. And Glastonbury, where we're building at the moment, I've had to lift 100 metres of path because apparently I buried a crystal. So, you know, you've got other problems. But I think it's a really interesting question. How do you get a national route? But that's what you're doing, isn't it? So you can answer that question.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think that, like John says, that those are typically more urban areas where it's less likely you're going to be able to build a community-driven route anyway. Not only there are examples, so there are examples. I mean, the Liverpool Loop line, John, is a good example actually, where it's not going through, you know, hugely affluent areas, and in many parts it's not. And I suppose that's the point about the network, because often, going back to the way John described how the canal network was 50 plus years ago, you know, often the canals were undesirable. They were going through really run-down, deprived areas, and sometimes trying to get the network in, you know, you couldn't always go to the nicest places. So in that sense, we've got a network that already serves a lot of underserved communities. And I think rather than the route building element and the community route building element, what we need to do and what we've been working to do is work with community groups and work with local communities to get those assets used more. And so funded by people like Sport England and others, we've done that down in Southampton, for example, which also helps get people volunteering in their local community, as well as raising awareness of routes. So, and it's important that we work with groups that are there as well, because why go and invent something if there's a group that will already do it? So you saw from the video that we certainly want to see different people and more people using the network and from the targets we've got. And I think a lot of that is the network we've already got, or the network that local authorities can build, or as John said, where routes are built, where they can be rerouted. And I think there's growing awareness of the fact that, you know, so in the early days of London, you know, the cycling strategy that I worked on was serving predominantly younger, well-off commuters through the cycle superhighways. And in actual fact, there's far more potential to turn the sorts of trips that are made by people who are not working, so or when they're not working, to shops, to the dentist, to the doctors, to see friends. That's where most of the trips that happen are, to turn those into walking, cycling, wheeling trips and to make them easier for people to do. So I think there's a lot to do. There's growing awareness of the need for that. I think I'd agree with John, that doesn't stop us working with well-organised, yes, well-resourced community groups who are still struggling to actually get routes built.
I think it really picks up the other question of a national route network, doesn't it? Because a national network, you have to go through these difficult areas. I mean, when I was originally surveying through East Glasgow, I just couldn't understand why all the traffic lights were hanging off their wires and on the floor, because it just seemed a strange place for the traffic lights to be. But I realised after a bit that was just what happened in East Glasgow. It was a really tough area, and you still had to get the network through if you wanted a route from Glasgow to Edinburgh. So I think really that you must hold on to the word national, because that gives you the power to tackle the hardest areas.
Thank you both so much. And that does bring this part of the evening to a close, and we'll be saying goodbye to our supporters and volunteers online. But the evening does continue. We've got some nibbles and drinks in the other room, so we'll have a chance to ask each other some more questions and have some chats. So do stick around. But yeah, thank you so much to John and Xavier for this evening. It's as ever been really informative and inspiring and exciting to kind of look ahead to now the future, the next 30 years of the National Cycle Network and beyond. So thank you both.
Thank you.
So, and if I could just thank you to you for being here with us tonight. A big thank you to the staff here at the Waterfront for making this possible. Thank you to Di and the team who've made it possible. Thank you, Katie, for comparing. And thank you to everyone for a great evening. And we will continue there. And bye-bye to those online.